Hey, folks, I think we'll kick off. It seems like most people have joined the call, and I'm sure we'll get a few more drifting in from now on. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening for the latest of the Community Tree Network Collaborative webinar series. My name's John. I'm the Events and Network Coordinator for the CTNC. I'm very happy to have you all here. This evening's webinar is growing fruit and nut trees for community tree nurseries. This has proven to be a very popular subject. I was just mentioning that, in fact, it's our most popular webinar so far. So over 100 people have signed up for tonight's event. I don't think we'll get them all tonight live, but it's great that there's such interest. This event is being recorded, so we will make it available on the CTNC webpage and on our YouTube channel as soon as it's been edited and available. So, yeah, if anyone has any questions for Phil during or after his talk, do please pop them into the chat. There will be an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. I know Phil is keen to chat with people, particularly keen to hear from any CTNs who are growing fruit and nut trees already. This, as I said, is a very popular topic, and it seems like it is something that a lot of people are interested in, a lot of CTNs, which is really good to see. So our speaker this evening is Phil Knott. Phil runs the Drumfearn nursery all the way up on the Isle of Skye. So he has been growing fruit and nut trees there for years. He has a lot of experience in growing fruit and nut trees, in particular in the island conditions in the Atlantic west coast of Scotland. So should be in for a real treat this evening. A lot of information. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. So as I said before, do please pop them into the chat, and we'll come back to them at the end. And then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A if you want to hold on, and you can raise your hand at that point. So without any further ado, I'd just like to ask Phil to begin tonight's talk on growing fruit and nut trees for CTNs. That's over to you, Phil. Thank you.
Many thanks, John. Just get the presentation up. Ourselves into presentation mode. Thumbs up for that one. Is that looking good? Are we on? Thank you, Tally. Thank you, John. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, John, for the invite for this session tonight. I will first kind of give us a bit of a background as to where Drumfearn trees has come from and my growing. And I think if you can see where I can grow, I think it's an inspiration to any part of the country as it comes. So I've had Drumfearn trees as a croft-based nursery for about 9 years, trading under that name for about 3 years now. And that has initially come out from the fact that I just needed some more trees for myself, really. So that's where it all kind of came from. And my connection with a lot of the tree nurseries across Scotland, I've really been pushing the small ecological scale of things, particularly on where we need some rather more bespoke trees and have rather challenging climates. So in terms of the talk tonight, I'll talk about my backstory for a little bit, just kind of initial 5 minutes to give a picture of the tree nursery setup that I've got here and where it's come from, and where we started developing fruit and nuts. I want to have a wider talk on why fruit and nuts as a particular thing to kind of focus on, particularly at this stage, and then look through low input growing and the methods we employ for the nursery and for the wider croft and orchards and community orchards I've been involved with. propagation methods. I'll spend quite a bit of time on that, with a focus on grafting, particularly the kind of grafting we do at this time of year, bench grafting or whip and tongue grafting, whatever name you wish to do, which I think has got great potential for community tree nurseries. And then planning a little bit for the nursery as well as for community orchards, some of the resources you get for that as well. Some of my easy management thoughts, and a little bit on pests and diseases. Of course, each of these topics could be a webinar in itself, and indeed there are multi-day courses on orcharding and on fruit tree growing and all things like that. So it's kind of give you hopefully a bit of signposting and plenty of food for thought, and hopefully some inspiration within that. So a bit of scene setting of where I am. Climatically as well as topographically. So the land capability map for Scotland's on the left-hand side there. So the beautiful Isle of Skye is the kind of the winged hand that sticks out on the left-hand side, deemed to some of the lowest grade agricultural land in the country. Most of that pink and purple area is less favoured areas. You can see all the best ground of Scotland, the yellows and oranges and things over in Angus and Fife and that lovely side of there. Completely different climate, completely different soils and geology and everything that goes with it. And on that pink map, although you can't read the classifications, essentially it's fit for rough grazing is the way it's classified. And with the rainfall level there, that's shows it on the right-hand side. Really interesting infographic I saw on the internet. That puts those high peaks somewhere about 3 meters of rain or so. We're 2.5 meters individually on the croft here. And there's parts of Skye that are 4 and a bit meters per year. So that's an awful lot of rain. That's an advantage for a tree nursery as far as I'm concerned, but there are other challenges it brings. And this is the landscape that we're in, mostly hill ground, and then little pockets, mostly of glacial tills and nice little areas of human habitation that have been there pretty much since the last ice age. So that's my first, that's the township of Drumfearn in the foreground, surrounded by hills and a lot of peatland and difficult conditions. But as you can see, trees can grow in that more fertile soil, given the chance, away from grazing and given just a bit of a head start. But is this orchard country? Is this tree nursery country? That's another level. And the croft as we knew it, you can see the lovely oak on the top left hand. That's a classic coastal tree. That's just around the coast from me here. Now that oak is probably 50 years old. So now in terms of the ground, which you've seen before, just very, very poor exposed ground, we're now into the country of growing trees, alders, willows, all sorts of other things that we'll take in this country. And trees do fine. It's a humid condition, it's an organic soil, so it's just that initial bit of shelter. But is that fit for nurseries and for fruit trees? Because it's a very challenging climate. We just didn't really know how it would fare. And so we thought we'd try some fruit trees. That was our first experiment with that. We've seen things in walled gardens on the west coast. Walled gardens are not croft ground. They're not open, exposed conditions. And there's orchards throughout Ireland and Cornwall and the Welsh coast. Are these things possible? So that was us. That's our wee Effie in the carrier there. So she's now coming up to 10 years old. So that shows you the kind of, it was started pretty much as we moved in. And now we're at the place of 50 different fruit trees on the croft in what is, you can see the kind of ground now, a lot more improved. And so, yeah, fruit trees actually do fine. But it's just getting those right varieties and getting the right rootstocks and learning about that as well. And when I say fruit as well, it's kind of going fruit and nuts. Within that, nuts are a bit of a slower one to kind of develop. I think the challenge with us is the rootstocks with that, whereas apple trees have kind of a lot more research done into that for more challenging conditions. So we put most of our efforts into fruit, but the nuts kind of are something that's kind of a slower burn within that. And now, yeah, we have orchards. We can use that term orchards from that, and a lot of people who are interested in crofting, interested in land management here have just said, how can this be replicated? Is this something that we can do to make our land more resilient? And so Drumfearn trees with the fruit side of things grew out of there just from the fact that we had a go. And we were lucky enough to have had a deer fence around the croft with the initial planting of trees. But these things have all worked out. And now very much kind of a food forest, if you so wish. That's a range of stuff. And as you can see in that picture there on the left, it's not just apples, of course. There's Japanese quince in there. We've got other quince, medlars, pears, Asian pears coming this year, plums, cherries. Some things working better than others, and we tend to stick with kind of the easier things of apples and things like that. They seem to be quite a tough thing. Medlar is actually a very tough fruit. That's that one in the very bottom of the basket, at the bottom left. If you've not seen medlar, well worth doing a bit of research. It's kind of like a giant rose hip, very medieval fruit. People said it would not grow up here. And so every time I hear that, I just, well, how much does it cost for a fruit tree? If I have to buy it in, that's fine. But now I'm a grafter. I can just get the rootstocks in, get them in. And so a tree will now cost me £5 to take a risk rather than going to a garden centre and spending £40. And the croft is itself, it's something we now manage for its byproducts as well. So it's very much a wildlife-friendly space, but I do a lot of coppicing and pollinating within that on slow rotations and making use of it. So quite a closed circuit. We don't export any of the nutrients really, apart from when we sell some of the trees out. But trying our best to improve the soil and get the soil ticking over away from what was a kind of a very overgrazed pasture 20 years ago to now a very fungal-dominated, healthy soil. And it's a great spot for growing fruit. You know, those are some of the apples there on the left-hand side. As soon as they've been grafted, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, I get them outside, and so they are grown outside all year. And so I tend to do 1 year trees. That turns around quite nicely. And that's actually perfect for us up here. You go to a garden centre, you tend to see 2 or 3 year trees, often feathered, opened up, many branches, and they're often quite expensive for that. Up here, where it's so windy and so exposed and the soil is hard, if you put big trees into the situation, they tend to go into shock, mostly with the wind and the exposure and the salt. They just can't really stabilise very quickly. You've got to stake them, and then you're kind of permanently hooked on a stake. If you still got a 1 year tree in without any side branches at all, plant that, and these are coming in at just over a metre. They're not big trees. I almost have to apologise for the size of them when they come out, but they're healthy. They've been outside grown without the use of artificial chemicals, so they are going to be that bit smaller. But they're ready and they're immediately acclimatised to that, and they're not in shock with the wind, and they are exposed to the elements, but they can adjust their roots accordingly and build from there. And the list of varieties for it is endless. I mean, the National Collection in Brogdale, where they hold the National Collection for most fruit. And apples alone is 2,500 odd varieties that you can order. You can order a cutting from. It's fantastic to be able to do that. But from us up here, the west coast of Scotland, the far northwest, there are no apple varieties. There are no fruit varieties. There are no kind of named fruit from this particular coast. It's a blank canvas from that. So I've got no research to go back on. Again, we've got stuff from walled gardens and Victorian records, but that's taking a little bit of Kent basically and moving it to the northwest, fully sheltered with gardeners and with all sorts of imported soil. That's not really a good measure of what can grow up here. We need resilient stuff. So countries like Norway have been doing that for a number of years, and they continue to put money into it. Whereas in UK and particularly in Scotland, I don't think there's been a named apple variety produced from a research centre in Scotland in the last 100 years. So it's something we've not put interest in. Obviously, red currants and black currants and other fruits we have. But I think there's real scope for work on this. And that's where Drumfearn Trees was born out of, and our croft identity as well of Wildlife Croft Skye. And we now host events, do a lot of webinars, do a lot of workshops. And mostly it's on request for establishing fruit, but also the shelter that's needed for the fruit. Because people often come in and really want an orchard and really want to get things moving. But if you don't have the shelter, and you haven't really started to build up the soil, they're going to struggle. No matter what you do, they're really going to struggle. So a lot of my advice is on hedges and shelter belts and things as well. But no shortage of demand for these things, and right across the Highlands and Islands as well. So I'm happy to kind of travel around for that. It takes me to all sorts of amazing island communities. This picture is in Knoydart over on the mainland. But overall, the croft for me has got to be a biodiverse space. And so we spread the trees out across the site. So it's not one contained site as a fruit tree nursery and orchard. They're all spread out, helps with pest management. And it means that the whole site is biodiverse, really, with that. Pest control is delivered by the willow warblers and blackcaps and things like that. The small birds are really clearing things out, and no worries about pollination here. If you've got hay fever, you need to stay away from our croft in the summer. There's no stock within it, and so all the flowers go right up, and it is a very diverse spot. I'm the moth recorder for the area, and so I kind of do a lot of that work as well. And that's kind of a really good barometer for health, I would say. So this is why many of you are here tonight, of course, of why fruit and nuts, really, and why should community nurseries and other nurseries and things kind of consider that, I think it's so much excitement. And for me, my creative brain really kind of ticked on with this, because I've been growing native trees for years. I'm really passionate about that, and I've been involved in all sorts of tree nurseries, involving with rare trees as well as just kind of the ones over here, so sourcing good provenance and growing them well. But with fruit and nuts, I think it opens up so many other doors, really. You've got, depends where you are in the country. So the Northwest Highlands is pretty much the only place that doesn't have fruit varieties named from it. So you go to other parts, every other corner really has local varieties that have been there for years. And there's lots of rarities. There's lots of kind of chances of discovery of these kind of fruits out in old gardens, out in the wild, out in old orchards. There's lots of like detective work to be done, in archives, by speaking to old folk and looking at old maps and plans, and then preserving that, because if it's a unique variety, there's only one of them as they come round, so they need to be cloned. There's a great projects I followed on social media as well about discovering wildlings. Basically fruit that's available in hedgerows, often been chucked out of cars or whatever as it's been going by, and one in every 20 will be really quite good, and so that'd be a new variety. If it's come from a pip, it's a new variety, and so you can then claim that for the local population. You can then do your own breeding as well within that. It's very easy to do that. It takes a long time, but it is something that you can be doing if you've got the known parents of two different fruits or nuts, and trying to cross-pollinate and cross-breed. Yes, there's a science to it, and it's not necessarily a commercial angle, but it is fun. And it's something that can be done on kind of a community level, but with long time scales, as I'll discuss. And so all of that is great pioneering work. So it's exciting, and I think it connects people with food and their local environment with that. And I think that's a really important thing for community tree nurseries to kind of get in. The picture on the top right, that's the bloody ploughman apple, and so that's one of the Scottish rarities. And without tree nurseries kind of pushing these things forward and estates and things like that, we would lose these amazing varieties. And in many cases, we don't know exactly what properties a lot of these old varieties hold. We haven't really tested them fully enough. They've not been looked at commercially, but they've got a good story to them. They're good apples, and often many of the heritage ones as well are built around keeping as well. A lot of the apples that we have in the shops these days, of course, are built for an international commodity trade, and they're kept in cold storage and there to look good as class one fruit in the shops. Whereas before we had apples that had functions and jobs that we would do, and that they would often just store over winter as well. Valuable sorts of things. Of course, with our just-in-time food system now, we haven't really thought about that so much. But there's plenty of amazing genetics already out there. And I think really we need to be a lot more resilient in using our land. And it doesn't have to be either or with fruit trees. That can be something you can just stack in amongst urban areas, parklands, agricultural areas, farmland. You can have three-dimensional thinking with that. And so for CTNs, I think it adds a bit of flavour. If you're a community tree nursery thinking about adding fruit in, it just can bring in a new audience potentially. People with different interests, and just maybe add a bit of different flavour to the usual years. Lots of people love the routines of the tree nurseries, of course, but fruit, I think, just adds a little bit of an interesting avenue, and it does open up new funding streams because it's food and other things, as well as biodiversity angles within that, and community engagement. So community orcharding and growing fruit trees ticks an awful lot of boxes. Sometimes just straight trees doesn't do. And it offers new educational opportunities, different trainings and community events. And ultimately, once you start getting fruit as well, that whole story is just fantastic, of course, and sharing and processing. And there's things throughout the year for that. And I think it's something that can be done at all scales of tree nursery, really, within that. So I've done it at a very smallest scale, but I think it can be scaled up because it doesn't have to take much space, really. And as a sector, fruit growing right now. Again, commercially, there's no, in Scotland, there's no commercial orchards in Scotland, really. There's some old heritage ones that people are repurposing, but they're not obviously a commercial going entity. It's just about more community involvement. But with climate change, who knows what we'll be able to grow? I'm just talking about simple fruit and hazelnuts and other bits and pieces like that. But you start looking further south, and it really opens up the potential for all sorts of trials and innovations. I am frustrated really that in this country we just haven't really taken that element on, and with agricultural payments and subsidies, we've not really pushed on a new form of agricultural trials. Within that, we've kind of just stood still and accepted that. Hopefully, there'll be a time where innovation is going to push forward for terms like agroforestry and integrating of trees with silver pasture, which can be done with orcharding, but also in arable systems as well. And I know some people have trialled it, but I've got a feeling this will become a bit more of a norm as it goes forward. Stacking enterprises. So that offers great opportunities for community tree nurseries to develop a lot of those things and have that connection with the land. And in many cases, those fruit trees could be taken on by the community, even they're on farmland. There's those various shared agreements on these kind of things. On to growing, both for the orchard and tree nursery. This is my setup really, and I know it's relatively amateur on the scale. I do about 1,000 fruit trees, and I've only got about 50 or so on the croft in terms of growing orchards, and I've got about 250 in trial orchards in other places. But I just try and make it as simple as I can. I don't want to be using too many bought-in inputs. Compost aside, the main kind of initial compost, while as I'm building up my supply here, is compost. Other than that, I do my best to try and minimise any inputs, and certainly don't go down the route of spraying. I think at my scale, I think that's certainly practical and possible. And I think community tree nurseries generally are at that scale where it shouldn't be too much of a problem with that. And most of my nutrients come from weed teas, from nettles, from comfreys, thistles, docks, all these things which are kind of undesirable. I just stick them in buckets and steep them for a year. They stink, I got to be honest. So it depends where your community tree nursery is. If you've not made weed teas, I use a lot of wood chip because I can make my own hardwood wood chip. It's healthy trees. It's not just from tree surgeons and from Leylandia hedges or something. It really works well. Fantastic mulch for moisture retention. Not that moisture's usually the issue here. And seaweed is an abundant resource for us as well, which is just amazing to have that. Yes, some of it's plasticky. If you get it from the right beaches at the right times, it's an amazing source of pretty much all the trace elements, as well as being a good mulch in itself. So I'm lucky enough that I've got an endless supply of that nearby. So what we make up for in poor soil, we've got with free seaweed. I did my collection today from a local coffee house. I get about 25 kilos of coffee grounds a week. That's a lot. It's a really fantastic mulch. Needs a little bit more research as to exactly the mix to get it right. I use it as a surface dressing. It's very nutrient rich and it's a very good weed suppressant. But it's just something. It's another byproduct that I go past the coffee house anyway, and so it's something I can just add in. So whatever you've got locally, give it some field trials and give it a shot. But the coffee is actually a really nice one. It smells quite nice as well. But shelter is absolutely vital for our setup here, and being water resilient as well. Despite the fact we get 2.5 meters of rain, we need to make sure that we have healthy mulch and healthy soil, and the ability to kind of capture rainwater as it goes as well. Because when it does go dry here, we are generally quite windy as well, so it does dry out very quickly. And as you see, anything we can get our hands on for growing, it's not conventional prop tech trays or containerized trays or whatever it is, or things. I tend to have this kind of setup. And these are fish boxes from the shoreline, so I'm very lucky to be able to have this kind of stuff. And this is resilient in two ways, really, for me. Mostly because it's a part-time venture. So me, with my own personal tree nursery, as well as the Broadford Community Tree Nursery, but both are part-time operations. And so I need something that's going to be resilient for me, particularly in terms of watering. I can't rely on volunteers to be doing things. I can't afford to pay staff here to do that. So I need setups that will last without watering for 3, 4, 5 days in the height of summer. And these kind of fish boxes and cattle lick tubs and all sorts of things, basic agricultural waste, I use. Get some topsoil in the bottom of it, and then basically just top up compost each year and use them as open beds on rotation for various things. And you can actually do this for fruit as well. For my fruit, mostly they're grown in 4.5 litre pots, and that's deliberately a little bit bigger than they would need for a year of growth. just so I can be a bit more resilient in terms of the watering. If I put them in 3-litre pots, which they'd be absolutely fine in, then I'd have to be managing them a lot more carefully. And for fruit and nut tree propagation, it's pretty much the same throughout, really, and the principles are all the same. Because of my scale of nursery, I practice bench grafting, which is whip and tongue grafting, mostly done from now for the next 6 weeks or so. And that's great for me in my calendar. It works really well. And that's what they always used to be done in that way. That was a commercial way of doing it as well. However, most commercial fruit trees that you'll buy these days are done through bud grafting, which is where a rootstock is planted in the ground about now and then worked on in the summer months. You only bend over double and slide a bud in and tape it up that way outside in the field. That requires quite a lot of space and rotations and other kind of ways of managing it. I don't have that option. I have space, but I don't have the quality of land to be able to rotate. So immediately I was drawn to the thought of bench grafting. I have the time at this time of year to be able to do that. And it enabled me just to do it in pots. So I have rootstocks, which I buy in. I'll talk about that. And scions, which I take of the known varieties and do some grafting. And I'll show some illustrations of that. And then pot them up in for those 4.5-litre pots as you see them there. If the graft is successful, and then it grows on 80 centimetres or so for a year, and that's a perfect tree for me, a 1-year tree. I could grow that on and make it a feathered maiden as such, but as I explained before, that's not what I want. This is my market, is for 1-year trees to be able to get folk for all conditions exposure included. I do a little bit of bud grafting as well, and if you've got availability in July and August, as often tree nurseries sometimes can do, it's often weeding and watering at that time, then it's not a bad thought to have. You could take cuttings of fruit trees, some of them, not all of them, and of course that's another way of cloning the variety. However, you have no idea on the rootstock and the way it grows. So if you take a cutting of a let's say that's a Bramley apple in that picture there. If you took a cutting of that and grew it on, how is it going to form in terms of its roots? Because every time you buy a fruit tree, it's grafted onto a rootstock of a certain size, ultimate size, so you tend to have a good idea of how big it's going to be. If you take a cutting and it grows out its own roots, then you have no idea. And generally, fruit, on the whole, if you look at kind of wilder crab apples, they tend to be in the 5 to 6 metre height range if they grow on their own roots, which is quite a bit higher than most orchard trees are, and that also means it's an awful lot longer. So if you take a cutting and root it, it's likely to be a very long time until you're actually getting it to fruit itself. But it'd be a resilient tree. You just don't know its properties. And most of these fruits, historic fruits, have been developed obviously from a pip at some stage. So that tree has obviously shown good qualities, but you'll have inconsistent trees of different heights if you're just doing it from rooted in a traditional way. Some things like nuts as well can be divided. Depends if it's grafted or if it's grown on its own rootstock as well. Most nut trees that I've worked with up here are grafted as well. And the rootstock is just there for effect. You'll still be able to produce nuts. Same as with apple rootstocks, they'll be able to produce an apple, but it's not the variety that you want, which is above the graft. Layering, where you actually kind of bend it down. You can do this with hazel stools and things as well, and pin it down so it roots that way and multiply it off that way. Air layering, there's those little videos you can see of that, where you basically strap a block of compost to a damaged branch halfway up, and see how it takes there. And generally you can get it to root and then cut the whole branch off. Loads of little techniques, and you often see videos where people just put a yogurt pot, wrap it in tape and fill it with compost, and then come back in 6 weeks' time, and you've got another tree for you, which is amazing way of doing it in the summer. And of course seeds as well. But if you do seed for any fruit or nut, you're going back to genetics. You're mixing it all back up again. So if you take a pip of a Bramley apple, it won't produce a Bramley tree. It'll have some of the genetics in there, but it'll go back to grandparent genetics as well, be in all sorts. Depends what pollinated it. And it's true of anything as well. So if you want the right variety, you need to clone it. So these are my typical tools at this time of year. And it's not expensive. Yes, you can go really, really fancy on Japanese pruning equipment and fancy knives and all sorts of things, same as with anything. But I mean, that total setup there, which is me for all my workshops as well, that's probably about £250 there for all of that kit. So that's not too bad at all. And that's something that lasts, and it enables me to deliver workshops throughout as well. I mostly use knives, those red kind of Swiss Army knife ones there, they are by their nature single bevel, so single edge, and very, very sharp. And so in terms of involving communities and volunteers and other things, just please bear in mind just how dangerous this can be. People who are handy with tools are generally fine. You see those cut-proof gloves. They're very useful for that, but that doesn't stop you carving into your jacket and all sorts of other things. I've seen all sorts of minor injuries from doing things. The more you are handy with tools, the better it is. If in doubt, I'm not sure if you would see on that picture, but in the very bottom right, or you can, if not, you can find it. I'm covered by a little thing there, but it's a grafting tool. If you just search on Amazon, grafting tool or something like that, you'll see these kind of shears, and they've got like a keyhole shape cutting blade, and you cut the rootstock on with one, and then flip the scion over and clip that, and then you just tape it up with the various tapes you've got there. So it just takes out the element of knives and uncontrolled kind of cutting and pulling actions as it is. I just use knives, and it's very clean and quick for that. Essentially, it is surgery on a tree. So kind of the key to a lot of the success is cleanliness within that. No dirt. Try not to touch things too much. Using clean tools and sharp tools throughout that. You know, if you're getting surgery, you want your surgeon to have clean, sterile tools and to be very quick and efficient at what they're doing. If you're just messing around and keep hacking away at it and letting it dry out in the air, it's not so good. Scion wood, which is the actual variety you're trying to clone, whether it be nuts or fruit, you want to take that at the right time. So you can, depends where you are now, but I know down south it's gone very warm now, so a lot of the buds are breaking. It's getting too late for a lot of the scion wood. Up here, we've still got some time. Spring is going to be a bit later with us, of course. But I do most of my cutting in January and February. I take my scions and I get my orders in, and then they get bundled in damp tissue paper and stuck in the fridge in labels. I had a very patient. I've now got my own fridge, but for many years at this time of year, my fridge was just full of scions. So I'm a very patient partner indeed. No space for anything in there. But that's and one cutting. So let's say a foot long cutting. I would do maybe 6 or 7 from that. So it's not the most efficient way of doing it, but it's very workable for me. And then the rootstocks, you can multiply your own. But generally, I buy them in, and I buy them on scale because I'm doing over 1,000. I buy mine in from suppliers, and they're conventionally grown, but they come in very consistent, very clean, and ready to go, very high quality. And ones I've grown on myself are fine, but they're often a bit woodier and a bit harder to work with. So for now, I certainly recommend getting that in. And that's often one of the hardest things is sourcing rootstocks for that. This is classic whip and tongue grafting. Although we shouldn't really be touching it after that, it's just for demonstration of how it's been done. And you can't really go too far wrong with it. People think it's all kind of 10 out of 10, has to be absolutely millimetre perfect. I've learned from my thousands and thousands of trees, no, if you just do 8 out of 10 quality cuts and alignments quickly and effectively, you're absolutely fine. So you're just doing a diagonal slash there, whatever is it, kind of 30 degrees, putting a tongue ideally on the same place on both of them, wherever you may be, and then when you push the two together, they slot in, and that's then just freshly pushed on the left-hand side there. You then tape that up. I use a biodegradable tape that just perishes as it expands, but you can use plastic tapes and things as well. So that's it healed in the middle, and once it's healed on, then the bud will start to flesh out on the scions. That's the right-hand picture. That's a medlar that's grafted there and is pushing on. And for me, I have that under tunnel in the tunnel just to it heals up because it's so wet and windy here. I don't want it getting pushed around and rattled around. So if you've got some tunnel space in February, March, which I know is a busy time for most tree nurseries, then that's great. You can work on that. And then as soon as that bud is going, I get it outside because I don't want whippy, fleshy, succulent materials from these one buds because I'm down to one bud. Everything is trusted in that. I need that to be tough and firm straight off. So before it starts pushing on and has the ability to snap off, I get it outside and get it exposed to the weather. And it often goes into a bit of shock, but generally then kicks on as it goes into April and May. This is my very amateur setup. There's my Angus who helps me on there. And this is the kind of the scale you can do it at. You know, and this is several hundred going through here, and you can rattle through. Myself and Angus, when we're working, we'll do, with all the potting as well, which is obviously quite a labour-intensive task, we'll probably do about 130, 140 in a very relaxed day. working on that. And it's at a fun level. I think any more than that, I think we would struggle. But for this time of year, it's a really enjoyable thing to do. And they're not in the ground, as you can see, but it does mean you can move them around a fair bit as well and change the setup. And that was just my food growing tunnel. I've now got a new tunnel for that. In terms of some resources for all these kind of thoughts, there's loads of great things out there, great models that I look at. So this is one from Ireland, Irish Seed Savers, and they've got all their regional varieties that people buy. And this is obviously a bigger scale nursery, and they've got some funding because they do a lot of heritage-based stuff. But I feel there's a great scope for this locally, and I know some parts of the country do have these kind of nurseries as well. I've got a lot in from Ireland because of the kind of links to Scotland and that kind of west and wet flavour. But there's loads of resources out there for different things. So if you've got a good connection for fruit and nuts locally, then go with that. But if not, then do a wee bit of research. And there's so much out there. There's amazing resources. This is from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, PTES. They've had some real projects on orchards. And that's just one little screenshot. I zoomed in on their map, and that's just off Anglesey. And see all the different orchards that are listed there, and where there's some details and things to connect. So it opens up a lot of doors, really. I think most of the heritage orchards are mapped, and then people who are selling trees and other nurseries are out there. So before you embark on things locally, I would say is see what's out there and see what's being done as well, and see if there's opportunities for good kind of cross-pollination with other groups as they are. Orchard Project is amazing. And amongst their many other things, they've got certificate in community orcharding, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So that's a great little course that they can run in. So do check out the Orchard Project. There's so many resources. I'm just signposting a few here, but I think it really opens up gateways, because if it's something you're not experienced with, planning and getting it right from the outset, you want to get it right, really, because you don't want to waste too much in terms of time and effort and money. It's not always just the growing of trees; it's where those trees are going to be going from there. Orchard Network is another one. Just type these terms in, and you will find them for the UK. You'll have a range of great things. And that links, so once you go to the regional directories, again, click on your area, and all the orchards are listed there with the contact details generally as well, and some of their history and knowledge within that, which is brilliant. And when it gets down to kind of community orcharding and where are these trees going to be going, how are you going to do it, the planning is really important as to what kind of trees you're going to be growing and how they're going to be grown. Because up here, grazers and browsers, deer or rabbits or sheep, whatever, that's a major thing. Are you going to have animals underneath it? Is it going to be just something for accessible, working? And you can see as a scale there, that's just fruit trees. Nut trees got their own stocks as well, generally quite low, apart from the biggest ones. And so you end up with kind of a choice of things. But generally, the smaller the tree, so the further left you go on that illustration, the weaker they are in many ways. They need support and they need more care. That's more towards the commercial end. The further right you go, the bigger they are, the longer they take, but the tougher they are. So most of you tend to settle in the middle. I tend to work on MM106, MM116, somewhere in the middle, and Quince A's for fruit. And that's somewhere, where it's going to be fruiting within a few years, generally self-supporting trees, and it's a workable height. You don't have to mess around with ladders and all sorts of other machinery or anything like that. It's nice and easy. So get the rootstocks right from the outset and plan for that as well. Are those going to be supported? What kind of site is it going into? Again, the taller the tree, the more wind it catches, but also generally the tougher it is in the longer term. And then the spacing as well with that, because the rootstocks do need their own space and things within that. And if you're going to be producing a standard style orchard, they'll need to be planted at it. And for the first 10 years, you'll think you made a horrid mistake. And then as they start to fill out, you'll get there. And then are you then going down for a full setup of staking and caning and posting and all sorts of things like that? That's a lot of big setup. I don't do that here so much because of so much wind. You get a lot of damage from wires and setups. I want things to be standing on their own roots, dealing with that. And you get dependencies on the stakes and things. And very importantly, I would say as well, labelling and mapping for everything that you do from the very outset. A fruit tree that's been grafted of a known variety and of a label that's lost, it's still got a value, of course, but if you still know what it is, it's no good for propagation and onward record keeping and things like that. And so it's important to have those thoughts. How's it going to be pollinated? Are those varieties self-fertile? You've generally got any kind of orchard, it'll be there, but if you're putting one variety in, just make sure it is self-fertile. But every variety will do better with a bit of cross-pollination. How are you going to manage the grass? All these kind of thoughts really within that. So for me, I kind of flip it back round to how I can manage it and how I want to manage it, how I want it to be biodiverse, with loads and loads of mulch, particularly hardwood wood chip, focusing on things like willow wood chip as well, raymeal chip wood, that's the RCW within that, to making sure all the trace elements are there. I don't really do soil testing, I just look at the trees and see how they're doing in terms of their health. And if they're putting on a foot of annual growth and it's quite green and lush, and it doesn't sound like much, and it isn't really, but if they're doing a foot of annual growth and it's quite green, then I'm happy with that. It shows signs of vigour. If they're showing any discoloration or they're standing still, that's not so good. And it's improving the local climates for that. With me, Drumfearn in Gaelic means alder, tree ridge of alders, and so that's the cones in the flowers you're seeing there of alders. They're nitrogen-fixing trees which are surrounding the orchard and absolutely make a positive difference. So if you can have a shared space, that's great if they're feeding each other. A few thoughts on managing pests and disease. This again is a huge topic you can just cover, but as a community tree nursery, you would have good biosecurity measures anyway, but it comes differently when you're sourcing these things in, because you're often buying rootstocks in, you're getting scions in from all sorts of different orchards, people donating things. There's slightly more risk, I would say, with some of these things that you're doing. That's why I get a lot of my materials from either my own trees, which I manage, or from the national collection, and that costs about £5 per scion, £5 per cutting. That's a lot of money for that, but also do it on a commercial basis. And making sure your tools are really clean with that, because people often use the pruning tools for the grafting and all sorts of things. You need to be really careful with spreading disease. If it gets a disease year one, it's just had it. How you're managing all the dead stuff, and ideally any orchard or any kind of nursery, you have a zero tolerance to it. But I know in some orchards as well, you've often got heritage fruit trees, and there's a value of wildlife, of course, to having old, dead, dying trees around. But when you're trying to have young trees go on, not so easy. So trying to have an orchard where you're trying to bring things on, maybe, it's a difficult balance, and I don't have any answers for that. But I'm not saying cut out old trees if they hold huge value for the local biodiversity. But for me, most of the principles of prevention, of course, of pests and diseases, and not being in a monoculture, but any tree that's kind of well watered and ventilated up here as well, because there's too much airflow, there's also too little. They can struggle, and if they have just the right amount of nutrient requirements, then they tend to be very healthy, and so they're not struggling. But if they're stressed through water or through disease or exposure, or other stresses, then they're open to aphid attack and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But for me, in the fungal areas, canker, scab, and fire blight are the main three. I'll show you pictures of those. And one little tip I'll give as well: if you have a chance to go out to your orchard at night time, well worth a look, because things look very, very different. And also using UV torches, I've noticed a lot more diseases and other bits with that as well. So it's worth just experimenting on that. I found that by accident when looking for moths. This is scab. This is something more superficial than anything. It can get quite serious. It's not a very nice blemish. It goes through the leaves and through the fruit. Generally, the damper it is, the more scab you get. I tend to get scab-resistant varieties, and that's easy to look up. So if you know you're in a damp area with rather challenging soil, you can eliminate scab that way. Codling moth as well, it's at least knowing of it. That's the classic caterpillar in an apple. They tend to leave these brown trails through it and tiny little marks you don't know. There are various biological controls for that, but that's nothing to do with the actual tree growing. Again, it's just the variety. You want a resistant one. That's some of them are softer than others and tend to get it, and it goes in fits and starts really. The main problem for us that we have, for a lot of fruit trees and for various nut trees as well, is canker. There's fungal canker, which is this you get in the Rosaceae family, but also you get bacterial canker in the stone fruits as well, the plums and the cherries and the like. And basically just get resistant varieties. You can't be immune to it. Certainly further west you go, the more you're likely to get it. Good pruning practices, good regular checking, and prevention is the main kind of key of this, and then very zero tolerance. But that image on the right there, if it gets into one of the main trunks, it does track through. It's almost like a sepsis, really, of trees. It has to track back down into the heart of it, and ultimately you've got to cut these things out, so not easy. And crikey, pruning is a whole other thing within it, but you've got to plan this as part of a community orchard as well, because it depends on the rootstock and the variety. So a vigorous apple on a vigorous rootstock, so Bramley is a vigorous apple, stick on a vigorous rootstock and has a monstrous tree, and no matter how you try and train it down, it will be just a monster. It will continue to try and push up and reach to heights of 4 or 5 meters, no matter what you do. So it'll be a vigorous upright tree. But if you've got a delicate little tree on a delicate rootstock, like a little cocks or something like that, then they're likely to be kind of a bit more small and open. So it's important to know that. And when you're grafting things and you're planning out an orchard, are they tip bearing or spur bearing? Are they at the very tips, or are they in the heart of it? Do they need 3 and 4 year wood, or do they just need 1 year wood to be able to do that? And then any pruning as well is not just a one-off exercise. I have to do loads of workshops on this. This is a real challenge to kind of get this balance right, because people go all at it, but then they leave it off. But you need to have a plan. For every winter prune, there'll be a summer prune to follow, and then another winter prune after that, and it's a constant thing. Little and often is kind of the key. But in community orchards, you need to get that thing of who's going to be doing that, and it's going to be done properly at the right times, the right conditions, and of course there's all the different rules of it. For me, I just focus on health really, and I know my trees aren't going to look uniformly great. They're not like the kind of the classic of wanting to be able to throw a hat through it and of these lovely shapes, because there's death, disease, there's really extreme winds up here. So I just focus on the health of the tree, keeping it as intact as possible, and then disposing of the materials as it comes. So, but you need to plan that where it's going to be going. And this is the kind of stuff that you get in all these kind of guides, and it's overwhelming, because that's a 2D picture. Try to imagine it in the 3D. If you've been trying to do pruning before, that'll be a whole separate workshop. But that's educational opportunities. Once you've got an orchard set up, or if you've got an existing orchard that you're able to kind of work on, it's something you can build on. Just get the expertise in and then start working on it initially, because there's so many different aspects to it, and you don't want to be overdoing it either. And all the different ways of cutting and managing. It's a whole other ball game when it comes to that. So for me, in terms of aspirations and thoughts, just for what I want to be taking it, and where I'd like to see other kind of either community nurseries or private nurseries or things set up, is we just see more field trials and things like that. We need to kind of dial it back almost 100 years and get that kind of pioneering spirit back into fruit and nuts, because I think it's where we need to be. We need to be a bit more resilient with that. Obviously, conventional commercial fruit growing has kept us very well fed, and there are apples and pears and things in the shop every day of the year. But we are so reliant on that system, and we've lost so much variety within that, of course. And as soon as we get into things like nutrient profiling of our fruit and veg, which isn't really available to everyday folk just yet, I imagine within 5 or 10 years we'll have the ability to scan fruit and find out that a lot of the stuff we're eating, although it might have the calories in it, might actually be nutritionally kind of bereft. And most of our heritage varieties, of course, have been bred in outdoor conditions without chemicals. But even organic apples and things are sprayed, of course, these days to all sorts. So to be able to take that back in small scale community orchard, I think is a great way of doing it, and it gets that engagement through. For me, I want to have open source kind of information on what works on the west coast of Scotland. That's a very niche thing, but I think it's quite important for people to tap into that. To be honest, in terms of a lot of fruit, you've just got to try it. Who knew that the Bramley apple would be really successful and still grown commercially in Northern Ireland to this day? That's where most of our kind of apple materials come from. If you have Mr. Kipling apple pie, it's probably from a Northern Irish Bramley apple, but that is from a pip grown in Nottingham. You wouldn't know that those genes are there until you actually try it. So same is true for me up here. That's why I've got 250 odd varieties in the orchards. No thought of any commercial angle on that. It's just on interest level and taking it forward. And it'd be great as well to be able to have orchard open days, and I'm sure many of you have been to that. You'll have more access than I do, to be able to go along to a site at any time from August through to October and have 50 varieties of apple or pear or nut or whatever available to try, because that's just amazing, and that captures so much imagination, having produce and preserving and various methods of cooking and things as part of that. So I would encourage community tree nurseries to be looking at trial orchards as well, how you can develop local varieties and planting styles and rootstocks and making it as resilient as possible for that. So I do believe that community orchards are a great thing. I think my word of caution, or the ones I visited, is they often get set up with a bit of funding and one or two people driving it forward. And then if something doesn't quite work out, you often see periods of kind of neglect within that. So it's often kind of make sure there's a resilient plan of volunteers and teams that can actually take it forward as well, because often they do go through phases of activity. And generally, pruning and orchards, the best thing to do to keep them healthy is to be looking after them, mulching them regularly, making sure that they're well looked after and engaging with them as well, not just kind of being sat and overgrown in the corner. But that does take some funding at times. So I try and get your orchard in a setup where it's managed by volunteers without any need for funding, because if it's dependent on funding for things, that is going to be a challenge for ongoing work. And then it opens for regular events, and that's what we plan to do here as well, get more of a culture going with fruit as well, and nuts, and get people engaged with that. And for me, as my clients, people I sell through Drumfearn trees, I will be trying like Norwegian varieties, which have not been tried in the UK before. I've done all my field research on them. I've had a good kind of good desk-based survey on it, but I'm very honest. I'm saying that these are varieties I've not tried before. Let's you can buy this, and you're the first person or one of the first few people in Scotland or in the UK to have that variety. So people love that story, of course, love that connection, and generally they work out. It takes time, and then there's a great scope as well for training courses. But I'm happy to talk on that. Whereas I've talked now, not too bad. I think I've done okay for that, John. I'm happy to open up the floor a wee bit to chat to folk and hear their stories. I see plenty of activity in the chat.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Phil. I think everyone else will agree that it's a good thing we're recording this session because there's so much information there. It'll be great to be able to go back and certainly there's lots of stuff I want to go and look up again. So thank you very, very much. That was just really interesting and informative. And as you say, there has been quite a few questions come up in the chat. I am going to use my prerogative just to ask one of my own to start with. So you had mentioned the kind of lack of varieties in Scotland and on Skye in particular. Have you, or are you sort of hoping to develop your own varieties at the nursery for Skye or for sort of Scotland in general?
Yeah, that's an important part of the kind of the raising of the culture here as well. Because if you ask people of Skye, can you grow apples, pears, quince, medley here? Most answer would be no. Maybe in a walled garden, in a sheltered bit, in a greenhouse, all that kind of aspect. But what we've shown is absolutely possible to grow all sorts of stuff here. When we did Apple Day a few years ago, someone came in with a crate of quince and it looked like it just straight out of a Turkish market. It looked like they just picked it up from a Turkish market that then just dropped it down, and they were perfect, fragrant, absolutely ripe, and that was outside grown. And just if you haven't tried it, you just don't know. So all of these can be grown from seed as well, taking that forward. But also particularly with apples in particular, you have roadside apples as well. So ones that have been discarded down the years. And if they've survived on a roadside on the west coast of Scotland and they taste good, that's really important as well. And they're not showing signs of disease, they persisted, then that's a really good start as well. And so those apples, because they're from a pip, they are unique. So immediately you can kind of start cloning those apples and giving it a bit of field trials. Now, of course, if you're going commercially, you'd be wanting to put that through 10 or 15 years of field trials. It is, but for home use, if it works, it functions, and it's nice, we can claim it. And for me personally, it'd be really important to kind of get some Gaelic place names in here. Get some more of a connection, get the local primary schools and things naming varieties. So going forward, as part of my big trials, I want to be crossbreeding out of a pool of 10 or 15 that I know to be really delicious. That's important. But importantly, resistant to all the diseases we can get here and tough as old boots in terms of the trees themselves. I think that's nothing better than that. And to be able to get school kids to name an apple variety, I think it'll be amazing.
That's a fantastic idea. Yeah, we look forward to seeing the new heritage varieties. So folks, if there's a few questions in the chat already. If anyone has any more, do please stick them in the chat. There's so many people on the call tonight that I won't see anyone with their hands up. So do please just use the chat. We'll try and get through these sort of as quick as possible. Also, Phil, I know you were keen to make connections with anyone who is already growing fruit and nut trees. So, folks, do please let us know in the chat if your CTN is currently growing fruit and nut trees, where you are, what you're growing, or what you're planning to grow, if that's something that's kind of on the radar for you at the moment. Well, let's crack on with the questions. Um, how long do you leave wood chip before you use it for mulch? Is more sort of kind of
Yep. So,
straightforward.
because it's fresh and clean wood chip that I'm cutting from hardwood species, particularly willows and alders and the like, I just do it as a fresh surface application, so I don't rot it down at all. If I'm making soil for the compost for actually integration into the kind of the growing media, then that will be a few years, and that takes a little bit longer to get through. But for the orchard itself, fresh as it comes, so eventually it will rot down. There's always fears of wood chip being nitrogen robbing. You often hear that, but that's only where it's integrated into the soil in any level. So as a surface application, it's quite a cap. There's an excellent book by Ben Raskin of the Soil Association on the wood chip handbook. There's a whole book on it. But essentially, you can't go far wrong with adding hardwood wood chip onto the surface at any time. You got to watch out for softwoods, of course. The resins and things that you get in the pines and the spruces and the like, and also other stuff. Where you're getting it from? Is it diseased or not? Because often tree surgeons they may be working on garden stuff, but they're often working on a lot of relatively toxic plants and often trees that are heavily diseased as well. So you'll be careful not throwing honey fungus stuff into that or others.
Um, Somewhat related, have you looked into using or making biochar?
Yes, yeah, I have. I would. That's one thing I've not been able to kind of do a retort myself, and I've seen there's various other kind of kilns that you could do relatively open. There's quite a bit of metal work in there. I think it would be amazing with the amount of woody material I've got access to. I think that'd be great, both for a surface soil application, but also for adding to the growing media. Because like other nurseries, well, I use some perlite in my mix, not much, but question sustainability of some of these minerals and things as part of the growing media. So I mix my own with compost and things. So I think biochar may well perform some of the same functions of moisture and nutrient retention and air as well. But I'd love to hear more on that. I think there was actually a webinar tonight clashing with us on biochar. I'm not sure if you saw that one, but I'll catch the recording of that.
We did this time last year. I think it was we had a webinar on biochar. Mark,
Yep.
who's on the call, and that was our previous most popular webinar. So you've just beaten that record by a few attendees. Approximately how long does it take from bench grafting until you're harvesting fruit?
Good question. I would say if the tree was in a good position and not getting last year, probably looking at well, sometimes you get out fruit in that first year. Depends on where you've taken the scion from and how it then develops on. But generally, kind of 3-4 years. But my best advice is to actually, I know when it's your baby trees and you really love them, you're so proud of them, you put so much effort into them, you want to try that fruit, but maybe just keep 1 or 2 on. But generally, the best advice for structural forming of the tree is to actually get rid of a lot of the fruit early on, rob the buds off, rob the fruit off, and let it form up vegetatively and get that framework up before it starts getting into fruiting mode. And that is harsh and clinical, I know. So yeah, maybe 3 or 4 years, but really let it push on. If you're on a really dwarfing rootstock like the commercial ones, they'll be producing heavily within 3 years or so on quite a light frame. But if you've got like one of the bigger rootstocks, an M25, also say for an hour, then the bigger the rootstock, the longer it takes, and sometimes it can be 7 or 8 years to get up that way. But that's because you're building a really big tree, and the aim is to get that framework up first.
A bit of tough love at the start doesn't do any harm then. Um, okay, so do you gather any data on which varieties are doing better or worse for your area? I think you might have touched on this.
Yes, yeah. So that's one thing I need to put into the blog. So right now, my field trials are at the early stages. Literally, the trees are just babies in the ground. So, and my control size is going to be very limited from a scientific study point of view. Having one or two trees that don't perform well is not it shouldn't be the death nail of that variety. But it is interesting. My orchards are in different places, and so if the same varieties are performing well in both and poorly in both, then we've got a good idea as to how things go. And generally, they mostly tend to be fine up here. Um, and canker is something that comes in a little bit later. So the growth form, the kind of the vigor of things is often fine with fruit and nuts as they come, but the diseases might show a little bit later. So really, field trials should take a long period of time as they go. But for me, yeah, it's a trade-off. But I'm happy to put all my stuff open source. I just need to kind of get that blog together. I need to basically get another year or two of information. Right now, the varieties that I sell on the website, and it's all kind of listed there, they're based on things that other people have successfully grown on the west coast of Scotland, or at least attempted on the west coast of Scotland. But sometimes the kind of myth gets perpetuated as well. And I found like lovely varieties like Discovery Apple is a beautiful apple. People say it's really fit for Scotland. It's a lovely early apple, so that's quite good for wherever you're growing. But I found it quite canker susceptible, and so I don't really feel that we should be promoting those kind of apples as they go. But people ask for them because that's what they've heard on from various blogs. So a lot of my work is disappointing people at other times and signposting them to others. And I'll always still have a few because people will insist regardless. But that's with fair warning.
Next question. This might not be relevant, or you may not be able to answer this given your location, but how do you recommend combating deer issues in an urban area? If anyone else on the chat wants to help Terry and Michael with that one, I'm not sure if Phil, you would be able to speak well to urban areas and.
Well, no, but in terms of deer management, we certainly have to have a lot of deer concerns up here. And of course, in a generally a nutrient bereft landscape, especially out on the hill, any orchards that are put out into the landscape do tend to attract deer. And it's very hard because apples seem to be really high on the palatability list, and other fruits, nuts, not so much. They get browsed a little bit, but they're generally a bit more open to that. I suppose for us is that we tend to feed our fruit and nut trees, don't we, as well? We tend to give them a bit extra care. I've always talked about the mulching and all the extra additions we've given them, and whatever is wood ash, other surface things. But that translates into the foliage as well. So the more we feed them, the tastier they become. It's like the vicar's roses getting eaten, but they've been fed by horse manure. So it's like they've been translated through to that. But if you've got red deer, in particular, that's a real problem for height, because they can get up on their back legs and really start doing harm. Diversions as much as anything, but true tree guards up here, that's really hard. You'd have to have a bigger rootstock for a start and get through it. Other than that, it's just to be Fort Knox.
Another one from Terry Michael is they say some of your trees seem to have a lot of grass competition. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, grass and flowers as well. I tend to have that balance off. So I'll have a quite a tight ring of mulch. I'll expand it a little bit as the tree goes up. But as long as that tree's showing enough growth for me, I don't want it to be too whippy. I don't want it to be putting on meters of growth. I'm happy for it to be putting on just a couple of feet at most in its early years. So I'm patient with that. So I will manage a really biodiverse site. You could argue there's maybe not enough airflow with that because I have grass that grows up and lots of flowers, but I like the biodiverse angle. And because my orchards are essentially trial orchards, I want it to be quite humid and quite fungal because I'm trying to push that back. But yeah, I'll just read from it. Yeah, ideally I'd be a lot more clinical and clean in a much wider mulch area. But if they're growing steadily, that's all I'm asking for.
There was a question from Manuela and Caroline, but I think you answered that because they were asking like how much do you balance when choosing a variety between sort of sweetness and taste versus kind of local variety or rarity. And it seems like you're going for a bit of a mix there in terms of you wanted to, I think you said earlier, you want it to taste good, but and also uh, be a decent tree and decent fruit as well.
Yeah, obviously, I'm a tree nursery, so I've got to think about selling my trees as well. So, people will ask for the Scottish heritage varieties, but a lot of those are developed on the east coast of Scotland. And so I'm very honest as well. I'm saying a lot of these probably not that suitable for it. Latitude-wise, they're okay. Latitude's not really a problem with a lot of the fruit that I work with. So I just tend to go with things that I like. So there's definitely bias within that. Things I look to try and promote as well in terms of resilient apples, especially keeping apples as well. They're not the big sellers. People want those really kind of nice eating apples, especially for kind of a garden market. They want something that looks good and they can eat off the tree rather than things that are going to be edible. Doesn't mean they look beautiful, but they're edible throughout the year or useful and functional. But some of the best keeping apples, of course, are the most flavorful ones. And I think we really need to get back into those because of these short-lived apples that we work with, and other fruits, of course, is all about how they look in the shops and how they store and how they keep. When you've got fruit that can keep over winter, or flavor profiles that people haven't heard of, and things like quince and medlar, which again is not really as part of our culture yet. They grow really well here in most conditions. It's a bit of everything. So for me, I go for something that it's got to inspire. So it's got to be tasty from the outset. So if you have to apologise for the flavour of a heritage variety, it's a bad start. It might be a great name, it might be a great story, but if it's a bit insipid or a bit mealy, it's a hard sell to kind of keep that going. And they'll think, yeah, okay, that's why I eat Jazz and Pink Lady apples, because this is what heritage apples are like. No, please go leave some of those in the past if needs be, or keep them for the more specialist places. Stick them in cider, but make sure you stick the tasty ones first. For me, Bardsey Island, I know it's a Welsh one. Bardsey is my favourite apple. If you've had that one, that's a really delicious. That's the perfect balance for me.
Okay. So yeah, I guess the next question is, are there any nuts other than hazel and walnuts, increasingly chestnuts that are growable in the UK?
In the UK, yes. Most of my knowledge is based on Scotland, so I think if Mark's on the call, he'll be able to probably chip in with more than that. Because up here, you tend to go into the hazelnut groups, really, and you kind of various filberts and cobs, which growing levels of success, I would say, especially at our last year. I think there is potential for it. I think the rootstocks need a lot of work for us, particularly as a lot of it's from down far south, like kind of the Kent cobnuts and where they come from, and the rootstocks might be appropriate for the south, but it's translating it to the north, and so a little bit more work is needed on that. Walnuts grow in Scotland. Obviously, with climate change, we don't know, and it's a very long-term crop in most cases. So the more varieties, the better. And we've got a few people trialing various nut orchards. So the Nether project, Frankie and Sarah down near Ayrshire, they're trialing various nut varieties. And Stock Free Farming have got some case studies of nut orchards as well. So if you look on the Stock Free Farming website, there's nut orchard down in Ayrshire, which has been started with funding, and there's one in up near Legg, I think, up in the Highlands. So not as much details on that, and I would love to think that chestnuts grow here, but will they be successfully fruiting? I don't know, and there's not enough examples out there. Most of the examples we've got are from trees from walled gardens, and of course they're a variety from years ago. They've not been thought on a commercial angle. It would be nice to think we could get some trials and gardens set up. A lot of things that like Martin Crawford has set up. We need some of those up in Scotland, really. Some food forests that we can just see. Because other than that, unfortunately, I don't know enough on the nut side of things, just the general filbert side of things and the cobs.
You. Let's see. Which is the best side to put orchard trees in the garden? East, west, north, or south?
Well, if you can go fruit trees at my latitude for a start, I think how much importance is the strength of the sun. I think it depends on the variety of things, because shelter seems to be my number one thing. And if they struggle for a little bit of light, they just tend to go up a little bit, and they tend to take more of a elongated form. But I've heard all sorts of things about pears need a south-facing wall and all sorts of things like that. Some of them maybe do to ripen, but the ones I work with don't seem to. Maybe I tend to skew towards the earlier varieties because of my latitude and late ripening things. I'm not so sure. I don't think sun is the most important thing for a lot of our fruit, really. So I think you can work on that. And bearing in mind, it's the height of the sun from pretty much after kind of pollination time. So mid-April through to October is when you want the sun. So get the little apps out, track where the sun's going to be at various times for that, and you'll find that even if it has half the day, it tends to be enough for a lot of fruit. I would concentrate I'll probably put my stone fruit more in the sun. But everything I've tried seems to do okay. But then my measure of okay is often just surviving and having a crop every now and again. But if you're looking for a regular, consistent crop, maybe you should be planning in for that a bit better.
Thank you. Some great comments in the chat. Phil, if you do get a chance, there's people saying what they're growing and where they are. There was a mention of using Irish Spring soap for keeping away deer, so I hadn't heard of that one before, but that's could be worth a try. Question: if providing native UK fruit and nut trees for natural rewilding, what propagation method is recommended to maintain the biodiversity? I guess that's probably a question about the more organic kind of natural genetics.
Yeah, it needs to be tough within that. So I would say I would probably point towards own root growing for that for varieties. A graft is essentially a weak point, and it is a place of kind of conversion of nutrients and a point of stress within that. So I think if it's on its own roots, it'd probably be a bit more resilient and tougher. When you look at things like fruit, you often look towards the wilder rootstocks as well. So with pear, kind of wild pear, Pyrus communis, and then kind of standard apples or crab apples, even as a rootstock, because they are more likely to grow that bit bigger and a bit tougher. Because if you're putting it out in the wild, you're going to need it to be pretty tough, and you have to consider pollination as well within that. So there's often pollination within wider families. So crab apples will do wider apples and things like that. But if it's things like pears, you're going to need 2 or 3 that are going to align for that. So there's a lot of considerations really for that. I would be looking towards vigorous, self-fertile trees for that, and there's plenty out there for that. So some of the bigger cooking apples, in particular, you can get them out and about, and they're just absolute monsters that will just keep growing and producing a very heavy crop, which would be great for biodiversity. So if someone's there to pick it, then great. If not, then field fares and redwings or very full tummies.
I think we've come to the end of the questions in the chat. So if anyone has any final question, do please drop it in. We're getting close to the end tonight. It's been a really fascinating talk and a great chat. I think the importance really of what we're talking about this evening. I just happened to be reading an article yesterday about the fact that native grown UK grown apples, a packet of them is more expensive in the supermarket than a packet of apples that come from New Zealand. Seems to be a big source for supermarkets over here. So even on that basis, growing more fruit closer to home is a good idea. And as well as you were saying, Phil, it's the story behind it as well. It's the history and the heritage, and the fact there's an awful lot of those varieties go back a long way and are connected to the local area. So unless there's any other further questions, last chance, folks. I would just like to thank Phil for a fantastic presentation and for taking all our questions. I would like to thank everyone for coming along this evening. Thank you for joining us on your Tuesday evening. Our next event will be our regular open sessions. That's just an opportunity for people to come along, anyone involved in the CTN to come along and ask questions from other growers. So that'll be sometime in March. I haven't set a date for that yet, but do keep an eye on the socials and the emails for that. As I said, this has been recorded and it will be made available as soon as we get it edited. So it'll be up on our webpage and on the YouTube. And Phil, if it's okay with you, maybe share the your slides with folk as well.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this evening, folks. Massive thank you to Phil and big thanks to everyone who came along. And we'll hope to see you all at an event soon. So happy growing, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Cheers, John. Good night, everyone.